Welcome back to Packs and Picks. In the last video, we opened up 6 packs of Bloomburrow for our 4th sealed pool for the set. And in this video, we're going to go over some of the cards that did make the cut and some of the cards that did make the cut in the ultimate version of the deck. So let's dive in and see what we had to work with. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the infamous Cruel Claw, so a 3/3 menace that if it deals combat damage to a player, you can basically play a card for free at the expense of discarding a card. So at the floor, this was a card that's like, do you want a 3/3 menace? That's the worst case scenario. And ultimately, I decided not to put this in the deck, not to go red-black, because the best scenario I feel is you're getting to discard a cheap card for a bigger, more splashier, expensive card, or you're getting some sort of mana advantage to trade off for that card disadvantage you're getting by discarding a card. And in our pool this time, we just didn't have anything too splashy at the top end of the curve that we could really, I feel like, leverage this effect with in red and black. So that's why the infamous Cruel Claw is going to stay in the sideboard this time around. The other big mythic that we had was Luge, the Shoreless Sea. So one blue for a legendary creature. And the thing about this one is triple blue is really hard to get to in limited. And even in the best case scenario, I could see this coming down on turn 3 if we turn 4 if we pair it with something like Clement the Worrywart, where we're in green-blue, so we've got a little bit of the mana fixing that we had in green, and our frogs in green and blue can help us tap for that extra blue. But even if we do that with our best-case scenario, getting a Luge out on turn 4, it's likely going to be a 3/3, and that's it. It's making our instants and sorceries cheaper, but in our pool, we didn't have a ton of instants and sorceries, let alone instants and sorceries that are really impactful to the board. And we didn't have a lot of the prowess creatures. So those are two things I would want to see in the pool to really pull me towards putting a Luge in the deck with that huge mana commitment. Now it does grow over time. Every turn it's getting bigger and bigger with islands that you play and as you make attacks and put those flood counters out. But I just think that triple blue and how it doesn't really impact the board super well when it first comes in means that Luge is going to stay in the sideboard. So even though we had 2 mythics, they're actually not going to make it in the final version of the deck, unfortunately. So I'll lay out here the first version of the build that I worked through. I noticed as I was digging through all the cards, we had a lot of cards that cared about being targeted, that Valiant effect from the set. And so I wanted to put together something and see if we could have a Valiant deck out of this pool. So this is what I came up with, a red-white version of the deck. So we've got a lot of creatures that care about getting targeted with an effect. So we've got things like Heartfire Hero, which I really like. So every time you target it, it's going to get bigger and stay bigger. We had a rare, an Emberheart Challenger. So 2/2 Haste Prowess that lets you get some card advantage potentially with that. We also had a couple good enablers in the form of Thistledown Players. This is a card that I really like to enable Valiant, give you kind of some pseudo vigilance and also trigger Valiant. We also have the Brambleguard Captain. This is one that I really like. So it's a 4-cost creature, but at base level, it's going to pump up somebody else +2/+0 every combat. It's those repeated triggers and repeated target effects that I really wanted to see out of this Valiant deck, but ultimately went away from it because we don't have a ton of those target effects. What I showed you there with Thistledown Players, Brambleguard Captain, those are kind of the heavy hitters as far as the targeting effects go. We've got things like Seed Pod Squire. Whenever it attacks, if we can target our non-flyers, one of our non-flyers with that. And then Roughshod Duo here. Also, as we expend 4, we can target something. But I just felt like we didn't have enough. We didn't have critical mass of effects that target other creatures in order to go with the red-white version. Also, we're pretty low to the ground in this version of the deck. We don't have a huge top end or ways to close out the game or ways to deal with big threats from our opponent. We've got, we're playing things like Bumbleflower Sharepot just to have a removal spell in the deck. So really this deck is looking to get a good board presence early on, make some good trades early on, or make some positive trades early on so we can build out a board and maybe close out with something like Rabbit Response. So that's really what this version of the deck's looking like, but because of how fragile I felt it was, it doesn't have a lot of answers to threats, I didn't go with this version of the deck. So I'll show you what I did end up with. Set that out right now. It's going to be another green and black deck with a little more room to answer some threats, but still not a lot in the way of really impressive cards that you're really excited to play. But still, I think it has a better chance to hang on than anything else in the pool. All right, so like I said, it's a green-black deck with a tiny little splash. Some things that I like going on with this deck that we didn't have in the red-white version. We do have more interaction. So we've got things like Savor and Early Winter as removal spells and unconditional removal spells in the form of Earlier Winter. We've also got some fight effects in the form of Polywallop over here and Longstock Brawl. We've also got some tokens that are coming out. We got the Baker's Bane Duo and cards like Scrap Shooter. So we've got another rare. So we've got a 3/3 or a 3-cost 4/4 with reach, which is really interesting to look at this card and compare to something like Illuge. So this is always going to come in on turn 3 as a 4/4. Things like Illuge might be a 3/3. And it's got a relevant ability in reach, and we can even destroy an artifact or enchantment if we want to give up a card to our opponent. So we've got a couple decent creatures here in the deck, a little more interaction. We've got this Tangle Tumbler here. This is a card that I do like the look of. It's kind of an interesting vehicle in that it doesn't have a baked-in crew cost, but we can tap tokens we have to make it a 6/6 with Vigilance. We don't have a ton of token generation in the deck. Like I mentioned, we've got the Baker's Bane Duo. But if we end up with an extra gifted fish along the way or something like that from our opponent, then maybe we can turn Tangle Tumbler on. But at the very least, we can start buffing up our creatures. I did have one extra spot in the deck. I had 22 cards, so I wanted to find a way to, if there was a splash or something to do. And so I did put in a Fountain Port Bell to help us dig up a island. We also have some mana fixing too to play this Mockingbird. So this was one of our rares. And for me, I put this at the top end of the curve because I'm going to treat this like a way to answer a good threat from our opponent. So if our opponent plays a good creature, then we could just copy it with Mockingbird and get one of our own. So for me, this is kind of another threat at the top end of the curve in the form of Mockingbird. And that's the deck right there. So we've got another green-black deck with a little bit of a blue splash for Bloomburrow. Let me know your thoughts on this deck. Did you like the red-white version a little more? Was there another color pair that you like the looks of in the sealed pool? Let me know, and stay tuned because we got more sealed packs and sealed decks coming up.